It is one of the crown jewels of boxing. We're discussing today, that's right, the welterweight title, and a huge fight coming up April 12th. It is Boxing Scene Today. You're inside the ProBox TV studios. Jimmy Smith alongside the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi, Robert Garcia joining us. Gentlemen, Eimantas Stanionis, of course, taking on Jaron. Boots Ennis, that is April 12th. Two of the best in the world at 147 pounds, both undefeated. Robert, I got to start with you. Tactically, Boots Ennis has shown he can do everything, but didn't look great in his last fight. Does that concern you, or do you believe his talent is just off the chart? What's your thought on it?
Yeah, that doesn't concern me. I think he's going to bring the best out of him in this fight. You know, it's against a tough challenger. It's going to be a unification. It means a lot to him. This is a fight that we're going to see the best out of both, actually, not just Boots Ennis. I think we're going to see the best out of both fighters.
Now, when you look at Stanionis, Paulie undefeated, but when you look at and he's given a recent interview on Boxing Scene, we talked about being the underdog. That doesn't bother him. Everybody's looking past him. Also, he agrees with Robert that Boots didn't look great in his last fight. That was a rematch. Chukadzian, he had already beaten. Maybe he didn't get up for that fight, but does that concern you at all?
It doesn't concern me. I think what I like about this fight is that I think stylistically it's going to be a fun fight. You know, there's flaws in Ennis that a weak welterweight division hasn't been able to really exploit. We've seen them subtly, though, they started to show. And one of the things I always had a curiosity about Ennis, and even when people were talking about him fighting Crawford, was he's another guy. Like we had a conversation about Nick Ball, about coming in through the front door. Ennis isn't really creative closing the gap, in my opinion. You know, he throws the same speed of a jab, or a lot of times he has that Philadelphia mentality, where that gym war mentality, where you just walk up to the other guy and you just, you know, bang chest to chest and you go at it. Not everybody's gonna just let you in the front door like that. You want to walk to this guy, he may not accept you that way. He may pick you off and turn you and whatnot. Either way, I want to see Ennis being forced to use those things. I don't think it's going to be in this fight, though. But what he has in this fight is a guy who loves it just as much as him, and it's very good at that kind of fight as well. So it still does bring a threat here. So I think it's a fight that, in a welterweight division that's been kind of devoid since everybody left not long ago, these two guys' names, and there was also Virgil Ortiz when he was here, those were kind of the names that we were looking at to sort of bring the welterweight division up. Virgil left the weight class. These two guys sort of went in different directions for a little while, and finally they're going to fight each other. We still have a welterweight division where it's them two and everybody else. You know, like everybody else is going to maybe try to put themselves in for a payday against one of these two. But I haven't seen nor been impressed enough with the rest of the welterweights, including the welterweight champions, to really say, you know, they got something for Ennis or Stanionis. This is the fight you want to make.
This is
right
one
now.
and number two. This is number one and number two in the weight class. Now we're gonna find out how far apart there is between number one and number two, because I actually rate Stanionis very highly.
And if it's not that far apart, I would like to see it twice.
Yeah, I actually thought this was always going to be a good fight, no matter what version of Boots we had. Even the Boots that looked untouchable and was like, man, that guy's a monster. I still thought Stanionis was going to be an issue, because it's just stylistically, he's just a rough, tough. Those Eastern guys, those European guys like that, and just the way he trains, he just looks like he's always in shape. He's a monster in the gym from what I've heard. So I actually really like this fight, and it's actually gotten better since we have seen Boots look a little human lately, where he does kind of walk in the front door. He does get hit with some shots. He can be roughed up on the inside a little bit, as Chukadzian did. And with a guy like Stanionis, who's as rough can be, this is a real fight. And champ, I think we actually might see Boots using his distance a little better, because he might have to.
I think
if Stanionis is what I think he is, he's going to have to.
And I think if Boots has that in his repertoire, I think we may have to see it. He may have to use some of that in order to be successful here. Otherwise, he risks losing. You know what I mean? Everybody's talking about, okay, Ennis is his favorite, but if Boots shows that he doesn't have any of that, for me, and he's just going to go toe-to-toe here and make it an exciting fight, he risks losing. I mean, at that point, it's anybody's fight, because both of those guys are good at that kind of fight. So, you can't, it's going to be very difficult to pick a winner. But if Boots shows a different wrinkle to his style, layer to his style, you know, and in terms of what I'm asking for, I'd say, okay, you know what, then you know, I'm back on that conversation where I know him and Crawford isn't going to happen anymore. But that's why I never even when they would talk about him and Crawford, I couldn't pick Boots over Crawford, because Crawford doesn't let you in the front door that easily.
Now, since 2022, Robert, Stanionis has only fought one time. What can you do in the gym about ring rust? You know, it's one of those things you don't know until they're in the ring. You as a trainer, you have a guy, big fight, undefeated, but hasn't fought very much. Once again, only once since the end of 2022. How do you test that in the gym? How do you overcome it? Can you?
Here in Southern California, he's always in the gym and he's always sparring. You know, there's so much sparring here in Southern California that I don't think ring rust will be a problem with him. He's always in the gym. You know, they're with Freddie Roach at Wild Card. Sparring is always insane, just like it is here in my gym. So fighters inactivity doesn't really affect. No, obviously, if we were talking about 2+ years, then we're talking about a difference. But you know, a year or so, I don't think it'll be a problem. I think Stanionis is going to be a problem for Boots Ennis. It's going to be a great fight. Boots Ennis is my favorite in this case, but not by very far. It's a very very close fight.
So, Robert, you see what I see. I mean, you've been studying Stanionis for a while now. Obviously, your guy Virgil and him were supposed to fight multiple times. That fight seemed to be snake bitten. So you're seeing the things that I was seeing about Stanionis.
No, definitely. Look, we've shared sparring partners. You know, we've been with them. You know, during training camps for sparring and stuff like that. And this guy trains. This guy's always in shape. This guy's never. You're never gonna find him out of shape. You know, it doesn't matter if he hasn't fought in almost a year. He's always in shape. So I don't think that would be a problem. That's why I think this fight is a fight that this year is one of the best fights, even though maybe doesn't get the same attention because Boots is still not that superstar worldwide, or at least here in the United States, and Stanionis isn't either. But us in boxing, this is one of the best fights of the year.
Now that's what I want to talk about because as I opened the show and I said, man, this was the Prince of Championships, 147 when I was coming up. I mean, every big name. You take somebody off the street, you have them name 3 boxers, not a boxing fan. Who aren't heavyweights, they'll probably name welterweights. Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather, Sugar Ray Leonard, all in the welterweight division. The idea that we have 2 fighters, Paulie, undefeated at the top of the division, it'll be big to boxing. But this isn't crossover big. At 147, that's been rare.
Yeah, and that's because we had that generation of really a lot of good welterweights not long ago, you know, all those guys kind of disappeared and left a void. And so these guys, Ennis and Stanionis, wanted their chance at those guys, but they never got that chance, you know? So they never got to really develop that name by getting to build it by the old school way, which was to kind of take over from the guys that were leaving, you know? Nowadays, boxing sort of has changed culture where, you know, when you're a star, you don't give the next up and coming guy. He's not big enough name anymore, so you're able to avoid them. And that's one of the things that I think is ruining boxing, you know, because the wheel has always turned in boxing. The guy who's fading out, who was a star, has no choice. He has to fight the next up and coming star. Now it's kind of they cut it off, and we saw that with Ennis and Stanionis in the welterweight division. With so many stars in the welterweight division, they weren't able to get any of those guys, and they were right there on the cusp of getting them. And then the welterweight division kind of changed face without giving those guys a shot. So I think that's why, despite how good they are, they're not mentioned like those guys.
Yeah, I didn't like watching Tito Trinidad beat up Pernell Whitaker, who I loved, but it's the way it went back then, right?
Yeah,
you hand it off to the next guard. Guy, right?
Yeah, and even Oscar beat him in a close decision again, changing of the guard kind of thing. I was actually at that Whitaker Trinidad fight at the Garden. Yeah,
but hard to watch.
Yeah,
as a Whitaker fan. But Chris, when you look at it, does the tendency for Boots, and of course we're talking about Chukadzian fight where he was not as into it, maybe it was a rematch of a fight that wasn't stylistically great the first time. That tendency to kind of fight down to his opposition in a sense, does that concern you at all? Because certain guys, like in the rematch, I'm coming at you harder. Well, I'm better in the rematch than I was in the first.
If that truly were the case, Boots would look bad in every fight because everyone that he fights, he's so much better then. So if he fought down to hit the level of his competition, he would never have been the guy that we're talking about right now. I think that Stanionis is the kind of guy that's going to make him elevate his game. He's going to have to show those other layers that I think he has, and hopefully he has, because if he does, he'll be a bona fide star. But in terms of that Chukadzian fight, one thing that we didn't talk about, and no one here has mentioned, the weight. The weight. He was having a lot of trouble with the weight. And what made me think about it, Robert, is when you mentioned that Stanionis is always in shape and that he's training year round. I've seen Boots get heavy. We've all seen Boots, videos when he's training, a week out from the fight, and you're like, he looks big. And I've met him firsthand. He is a gigantic welterweight. So for him to whittle himself back down to 147, is that going to be part of this fight? Because I do believe that was an issue in the Chukadzian fight, and he even mentioned himself in the post-fight interview with Eddie. So I'm curious to see, is he going to be whittling himself down in a healthful manner so he can be the best version of himself. Obviously, there's a lot on the line, so I would hope so. But that's going to be in question too.
Robert, how do you test that? If you're in Stanionis' corner, if you're getting ready for this fight, you think maybe a guy might be sucked up from the weight cut. Famously, De La Hoya Pacquiao, right? Pacquiao was told, get on him early. The cut looked really tough. Get on him early. Is that what you would implore Stanionis to do?
Oh, definitely. Stanionis is going to test him, and that's a perfect style to test him. Somebody that's aggressive, somebody that's strong in the late rounds. If Boots does have problems making weight, he's in trouble in the late rounds, because that's where we'll show. We'll see his legs, his performance starting to fade in the late rounds. I think Stanionis is going to be the perfect fighter to test Boots Ennis if he had trouble making weight.
What I'm curious about, Paulie, we've discussed it before. Are you surprised he didn't move up to 54 with all the names there and everything at 54? He was having trouble making 47. Are you surprised we're seeing him again at welterweight, Boots Ennis?
I mean, maybe a little surprised, but you got the Stanionis fight, so it's a good fight. You know, I don't.
You're
mind
glad
it.
it's happening at 47.
Yeah. I'm of the belief that if you can make the weight, then don't force yourself up. And then you might have to give it some extra effort to make 47. But you know what? We got a viable fight out of this. So I'm glad he stayed at 47.
If he does win, this is his last one.
I don't think so. I think,
Really?
and I even said that before with the whole talk about him moving up. Is I didn't think he should move up. I think he should just make the weight, and if he still can, if he physically make the weight, There aren't standout fights. The Stanionis fight actually is a standout fight, but the rest of the division, if he was going to try to unify, those aren't standout opponents. They're not going to make standout fights. But if you're undisputed, who cares? You unified the welterweight division. We've been talking about how important that division is, even though right now it's weak. But in this era of the 4-belt era where guys are unifying all the time, he enters a different room. It's not just a championship room. It's a unified champion room.
And this is also the toughest of the unification fights, right? If you're going to, the other ones are not as difficult in this weight class. So if he can make the weight, he may end up, like I said, we may end up having to see 2 fights for these guys, or more, So if that ends up wasting time, he may not be able to make welterweight for long enough.
It's always harder to knock on the door of the kingdom and go behead the king.
Yeah.
And that's something that he's going to have to do. Spence did it to a degree, and then Crawford was able to, obviously dominate him, destroy him, showed his level. But the way that Ennis is going to have to do this is, you got to get through a really tough Stanionis. Then you got to move on. You got to go to Brian Norman Jr. Then you got to go, who's Mario Barrios?
Yeah.
So to be able to knock on the kingdom of every one of those, it's easier to defend than it is to take. So guys who go out there and take, like Usyk did at cruiserweight, I'm always super impressed when guys get it that way.
Oh, he's going to get it the hard way, and it's a very tough fight coming up April 12th, Stanionis versus Boots Ennis for the champs. Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi, also Robert Garcia, thank you so much for joining us. Stay here and get all your boxing news right here on ProBox TV. Find out why millions are watching.